July 13th, 2023. A quiet Long Island architect is dragged out of his office in handcuffs. For over a decade, he'd hidden a monster behind a wedding ring, and his wife of nearly 30 years had no idea the man sleeping beside her was America's most hunted serial killer, and finding out changed the course of her life forever.
I understand that you are confessing to me on these murders. Can you please tell me how many of these women did you kill?
These are 8 times wives came face to face with the truth about the men they married.
Serial killer. Police say he's the Gilgo Beach murderer who killed at least 7 women and ditched their remains on a beach on Long Island in New York. As he awaits trial, a new documentary is taking a deep look at the crimes, including a new interview with the suspect's wife, who, despite all the evidence against him, believes they arrested the wrong man.
Now to the Gilgo Beach murder case. We've learned that 6 days after suspect Rex Heuermann was taken into custody, his wife has filed for divorce.
CBS 2's Jennifer Bisram reports it comes as more women are coming forward, sharing their chilling encounters.
Asa Ellerup thought she knew her husband. They'd been married since 1996. He was a towering architect who commuted into Manhattan every day. He coached, he provided, he came home. To her, he was Rex. To the world, he was about to become the Gilgo Beach killer.
Did you feel you were sitting across the table from a stranger?
No. When he started talking, I started feeling like that's the Rex I know. But I didn't want to see that one. I wanted to see the one I needed to see.
For over 10 years, women had been vanishing off Long Island, their remains turned up along Ocean Parkway, wrapped and dumped near the beach. The case went cold. It became a legend, the subject of documentaries and endless online theories. And the whole time, the man responsible was living in a modest house in Massapequa Park with his wife and kids. What finally cracked it was a fresh task force and modern DNA testing. Investigators zeroed in on Rex, tied him to the victims, and watched him for months before making their move. July 13th, 2023, that all ended. Police arrested Rex outside his office. Asa filed for divorce almost immediately. But here's the part that's hard to wrap your head around. She didn't move out. She stayed in that house. Then came the confession. As part of his plea deal, Rex was allowed to tell his family the truth himself, in private, before the world heard it. So Asa sat across from the man she'd shared her life with, and she asked him a simple question: how many? His answer was one word: 8.
Is there any hesitation when he said 8?
He told her 7 of those women died in the basement of their family home. The basement she'd walked past 1,000 times. The basement that sat under her feet while she slept, cooked, and raised her children. April 8, 2026, Rex Heuermann pleaded guilty to killing 8 women: Sandra Castella, Karen Vergata, Valerie Mack, Jessica Taylor, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello. He was sentenced to life in prison, and Asa, she did something almost no one could imagine. She gutted that basement, the so-called kill room, and she turned it into a space she now sleeps in. She said Rex admitted he took the bodies apart in that very room. She said she's haunted by dreams every single night, and that it will never go away. She wasn't a suspect. She wasn't a partner in any of it. She was a wife who found out at the worst possible moment that the person she trusted most was a stranger wearing her husband's face. And if you think that's the most disturbing way to learn the truth, wait until you hear how our next wife found out. Because for her, the evidence didn't come from a confession, it came from her own backyard.
The crime tape came down today. After finding skeletal remains, 5 people here, investigators say the search is over. By then, his personal and professional life was crumbling. His wife filed for divorce. He was falling deeper and deeper in debt.
Picture an 18-acre estate outside Indianapolis. A big house, a pool, a play area built for the kids. This was Fox Hollow Farm, home of Herb Baumeister, his wife Julie, and their 3 children. From the outside, it looked like the American dream. Julie had married Herb back in 1971. They ran a chain of thrift stores together. They went to church. They raised a family. But the marriage was strange in ways Julie couldn't explain to anyone. In her own words to detectives later, she said in over 2 decades, she had never even seen her husband without his clothes on. Now here's where the story turns. December 1994. The kids were playing out in the woods behind the house, the part of the property that stretched off into the trees. And one of the couple's teenage sons came walking back toward the house, carrying something. He handed it to his mother. It was a human skull. Herb wasn't home. Julie stood there holding a piece of a person that her child had just pulled out of their own backyard. And when she confronted Herb about it, he had an answer ready. He told her it was an old anatomical skeleton, a leftover from his father, who'd been an anesthesiologist, a medical curiosity, nothing more. And she believed him. For almost 2 years, she believed him. But the marriage was falling apart. The business was collapsing. Herb's temper was getting worse. And in June of 1996, as their divorce moved forward, Julie finally gave police permission to search the property. What they found turned that peaceful estate into a nightmare. Scattered across the grounds, sometimes just 50 feet from the house, were the burned and shattered remains of at least 11 people. Herb had been luring men from Indianapolis, bringing them back to Fox Hollow while his family was away at their lake condo, and killing them. Then he tried to destroy the evidence. Some of those remains were found near the play area Herb had built for his own children. Investigators also came to suspect he'd hidden a camera in a basement vent, positioned to record what happened down there. Investigators recovered thousands of bone fragments. The county coroner later said those fragments could represent as many as 25 victims or more. But Herb never faced a courtroom. As police closed in, he fled to Canada. By the time they caught up to him at a provincial park in Ontario, he was already gone. Julie was left to make sense of it. This was the woman who'd raised children on that land, who'd walked those woods, who'd hosted family barbecues a stone's throw from a burial ground. She told detectives something chilling and simple about the man she'd spent 25 years beside. She called him a very mean man who could do very mean things to people. A skull in a child's hands. That's how one family learned the truth. Our next wife didn't find a body. She smelled one. For years.
Of the year, because besides working full-time, I also, I was the chaplain for the JCs and also ran the membership campaign. And of course we used we had stag shows, and that's how we increased the membership from 150 to 400 members in that JC chapter.
Everybody in the neighborhood knew John Wayne Gacy. He threw block parties. He ran a successful contracting business. He dressed up as Pogo the Clown and performed for children at hospitals and charity events. He was, by every appearance, the friendliest man on the street. Carol Hoff married him in 1972. She moved into his house on West Somerdale Avenue in the Chicago suburbs, and she brought her 2 young daughters with her. She thought she was building a family with a hard-working, sociable guy. But almost right away, something in that house was wrong. There was a smell. A thick, rotting stench that seemed to seep up from below the floorboards. Carol complained about it constantly. John kept blaming it on moisture, dampness in the crawl space, dead rodents. He'd go down there and pour bags of lime around, telling her it would take care of the problem. It never really went away. Then there were his nights. John would disappear for hours, coming home at strange times with no real explanation. Carol started noticing other things too. She found wallets and IDs that belonged to teenage boys. She found magazines she couldn't explain. When she pushed him on any of it, he'd erupt in rage. By 1976, she'd had enough. Carol divorced John Wayne Gacy and got herself and her daughters out of that house. And at that point, she still had no idea what she'd actually been living on top of. Because 2 years later, the truth came out. December 1978, a local teenager vanished after telling his mother he was going to meet a contractor about a job. That contractor was John Wayne Gacy. This time, police looked closely. And when they finally searched that house on Summerdale, they found the unthinkable. Down in the crawl space under the floor, where Carol and her children had eaten dinner and watched television and slept, investigators found the remains of victim after victim. In the end, John Wayne Gacy was tied to the deaths of 33 young men and boys. Most of them were buried right there, beneath the home. That smell Carol had complained about for years, that stench her husband kept blaming on rats and dampness. It had never been rats. Later, Carol would say the thought that haunts her most is a quiet one. She said if there were murders, some of them must have happened while she was in that house. She wasn't wrong. She had shared a home, a bed, and a life with a man who was hiding the worst crimes imaginable a few feet below where her family slept. Gacy hid his victims under the floor. Our next husband hid his in plain sight, and his wife would end up connecting to those crimes in a way she never saw coming.
Gary had always been a loving husband.
He made me feel like I knew it was the best. To me, anyway.
That's why it was easy for Gary to convince her. His arrest was just a case of mistaken identity.
Judith Mawson used to say her husband made her feel like a newlywed every single day. Gary was sweet. He was steady. He had a smile that never seemed to change. She thought she'd found her happy ending. She had no idea she'd married the most prolific serial killer in American history. Judith met Gary in the 1980s. They married in 1988. He worked as a truck painter, the same job for decades. He was quiet, religious, reliable. And in one dark detail Judith would only understand much later, he was so unremarkable that she'd never even heard the nickname the whole region was terrified of: the Green River Killer. For years, women, many of them young and vulnerable, had been disappearing around King County, Washington. Their bodies were being left near the Green River. Because Gary targeted people society tended to overlook, he was able to keep killing for a long time without drawing the right kind of attention. The case became one of the biggest manhunts the state had ever seen. But Judith didn't follow the news. So while the region panicked, she was at home, in love, planning a life with Gary. Here's the thing that makes her story so haunting. 4 of Gary's murders happened during their marriage. He was killing while coming home to her. November 30th, 2001, the manhunt ended. Judith was out in the garage, cleaning, when police came for her husband. DNA had finally tied Gary Ridgway to the murders. He was arrested right there. Judith's reaction wasn't anger. It was pure disbelief. She later said it was like a brick wall dropping in front of her. She kept repeating that she was in such denial. How could the gentleman she loved be the monster the whole state had hunted for 20 years? Then investigators started showing her the evidence, and denial wasn't an option anymore. They found condoms hidden inside the frame of his pickup truck, and they found something in her own car, traces that told them Gary had used the vehicle Judith drove to pick up his victims, the car she ran errands in, the car that sat in her own driveway. 2003, Gary Ridgway pleaded guilty to 48 counts of murder. Years later, another conviction pushed the count to 49. In plea talks, he claimed the real number could be as high as 80. Judith cooperated fully. Investigators never believed she knew a thing. One author even wrote a book about her calling her the unsuspecting wife, because that's exactly what she was, a woman who married a man for his kindness, and slowly learned that kindness was a mask. Judith married a killer without ever knowing his nickname. Our next wife knew her husband's nickname perfectly well. She just never imagined the man behind it was hers. For 31 years, the city of Wichita, Kansas lived in fear of 3 letters: BTK, bind, torture, kill. It was the name a killer had given himself in taunting letters he mailed to the police and the press. He murdered, then he bragged about it. And then, for years at a time, he'd go silent. The whole time he was hiding in the most ordinary life you could picture. Paula Dietz married Dennis Rader in 1971. He was a churchgoer. In fact, he was president of the church council. He was a Cub Scout leader. He worked as a local compliance officer, the guy who'd ticket you for tall grass or a loose dog. He and Paula raised 2 kids in Park City. To Paula, Dennis was maybe a little controlling, a little rigid, but he was her husband of more than 3 decades. She had brushes with the truth she never recognized. He once wrote a strange poem. Paula figured it was something for a class he was taking. It was actually about one of his victims. And in a moment that's almost too eerie to believe, Paula once looked at his handwriting and joked to him that he spelled just like BTK, the killer whose letters were all over the news. She was teasing her own husband about being the man terrorizing their city. She had no idea how right she was. February 25th, 2005, it all came apart, and it was Rader's own ego that undid him. After years of silence, he'd started taunting police again, and he asked them if a floppy disk could be traced. They lied and said no, so he mailed one in. Hidden data on that disk pointed investigators straight to a man named Dennis at his church. They arrested him, and when they told Paula who her husband really was, her entire life detonated in an instant. The FBI swarmed the family home, and there, inside the house Paula had lived in for decades, they pulled out a locked box. A box she had never opened. Inside was what detectives called the mother lode. Victims' IDs, driver's licenses, personal items, photographs of Rader posing in disturbing ways, documenting his crimes. It had all been sitting in their home the whole time. In total, Dennis Rader was tied to 10 murders, including the murder of an entire family early in his killing years. Paula didn't hesitate. She filed for divorce and had it granted on an emergency basis the very same day, waiving the usual waiting period. She never visited him. She never wrote to him. She was done. One of the lead detectives on the case put it best. He said Paula's only mistake in life was caring for Dennis Rader. Paula's husband hid his trophies in a box in their home. Our next wife's husband was a decorated military officer, and he hid his crimes somewhere much harder to find.
Bob was a baker. His wife, Darla, was a teacher at a Christian school. They eventually had 2 children.
She's this gentle person who has time for Bob.
Getting a woman like Darla to love him, although that's an achievement that he might have thought would never have happened, she's not the type of woman he was after.
Anchorage, Alaska, the 1970s and early 80s. There's a baker in town named Robert Hansen. He's mild-mannered. He stutters. He runs a bakery. He flies his own small plane. And he's a champion big game hunter with trophies to prove it. He also has a wife named Darla and 2 kids. What almost nobody knew was that Robert Hansen was hunting more than animals. Darla was a devout church-going woman. She married Robert believing in him, and she kept believing in him even when there were warning signs. Because there were signs. Over the years, Robert was arrested more than once for things like theft and worse, and every time Darla stood by him, they'd go to church together afterward. She was convinced that faith could fix whatever was broken in her husband. She suspected he might be seeing other women. That was the extent of it in her mind. A flawed man, maybe an unfaithful one, but a fixable one. The reality was almost unthinkable. Robert Hansen was abducting women, flying them out into the vast Alaskan wilderness in his private plane, releasing them and hunting them down like game across the frozen backcountry. For years, he got away with it, because who would ever suspect the stuttering neighborhood baker? His run ended when one intended victim escaped and went to police with a story so specific it couldn't be ignored. October 1983, investigators searched the Hansen family home. Darla was there. So were the children and Robert's own mother. And in that house, police uncovered the proof. They found jewelry and keepsakes that had belonged to his victims, trophies he kept. And they found an aviation map marked with locations. Those markings turned out to be the spots where he'd left the women he killed. In the end, Robert Hansen was tied to at least 17 murders and dozens of assaults. He'd hidden all of it behind a bakery counter and a church pew. For Darla, the collapse was total. This was a woman who'd anchored her whole life to the belief that her husband was a good man who'd simply lost his way. An author who later spoke with her described it perfectly. He said Darla always sensed something was off with Bob. She just could never have imagined anything close to what he was actually doing. Darla divorced Robert when her children started getting bullied over their father's crimes. She moved the family clear across the country to start over. Darla clung to faith and hoped her husband could be saved. Our next wife had no warning signs at all because her husband was an expert at hiding things, and he made sure she'd never find them.
He was a killer with the ultimate cover. As a base commander in the Canadian Air Force, Colonel Russell Williams comforted families of the fallen, rubbed shoulders with the Prime Minister, and even flew planes for the Queen. But no one, including his wife, knew that he was also a deviant, burglar, rapist, and murderer. And today, what began as fetish and fantasy led to a life sentence of solitary misery.
Colonel Russell Williams was one of the most trusted men in the Canadian military. He commanded the country's largest Air Force base. He'd flown government VIPs, even members of the royal family. He was disciplined, respected, and headed for the very top. And he was married to Mary Elizabeth Harriman, an executive at a major health charity. Behind that spotless uniform was a double life almost no one could have detected. Starting around 2007, Williams began breaking into homes near his base, stealing women's underwear, and photographing himself in his crimes. This wasn't a one-time thing. Investigators eventually tied him to more than 80 of these break-ins. Then it escalated. It went from theft to home invasions and sexual assault, and then to murder. He killed 2 women, including one of his own subordinates on the base he commanded. Now here's what makes his wife's situation so different from the others on this list. Williams wasn't sloppy. He was meticulous. He documented his crimes obsessively, taking photos and videos, but he didn't leave them lying around. Prosecutors later said he buried those files deep inside the family computer, tucked away in a maze of hidden folders inside folders. The reason was cold and deliberate. He built that digital maze specifically so his wife would never stumble onto the truth. When Mary asked about his odd late-night behavior, his long walks at strange hours, he had a ready excuse. He told her he was stretching out his sore back. February 2010, it ended. Police had matched tire tracks and boot prints from a crime scene directly to Williams. They brought him in for questioning, and over a long interrogation, the commander broke. And even in that room, part of what weighed on him was her. He told investigators he was struggling with how upset his wife was going to be. He said he wanted to minimize the impact on her. Think about that. In the middle of confessing to murder, he was still managing the image he'd built for the woman at home. Inside the couple's own house, police recovered stolen items connected to his crimes, tucked away in the garage and basement. Russell Williams pleaded guilty. He was stripped of his rank, his uniform literally burned, and sentenced to life in prison. Mary was widely seen as a woman who'd been completely deceived by a husband engineered to deceive. She later divorced him. She'd married a national hero, only to learn that the most dangerous predator in the region had been sleeping down the hall, hiding his secrets in a computer built to keep her blind. Every wife so far learned the truth from evidence, a confession, or an arrest. Our last wife helped catch her husband without even knowing it, and the clue came from inside her own family.
A crime, the dimensions of which are still unknown. Police believe that Lonnie Franklin Jr. murdered at least 10 people, all African-American women from South Central Los Angeles, beginning in 1985.
For more than 2 decades, a killer stalked the streets of South Los Angeles. He targeted vulnerable women, then seemed to vanish for years at a time before striking again. The long gap earned him a chilling nickname in the press, the Grim Sleeper. The man behind it turned out to be a neighborhood fixture. Lonnie Franklin Jr. worked in city sanitation. He fixed cars in his yard. Neighbors knew him, kids knew him, and his wife, Sylvia, knew him as a husband and a father. Sylvia had married Lonnie in the 1980s. She was described as a loyal, deeply religious woman who raised their 2 children and kept the household running. By every account, she believed she was married to an ordinary, hardworking man. She had no window into the second life he was living out on those streets. For years, the Grim Sleeper case went nowhere. Police had DNA from the crime scenes, but no name to match it to. The killer wasn't in any database. It looked like he might never be caught. Then came a twist almost too strange to script. The couple's son got arrested on an unrelated charge, and his DNA went into the system. When investigators ran the Grim Sleeper's DNA again, they got a partial hit. Not an exact match, but a family match. The genetic trail pointed straight at a close male relative of that young man. It pointed at his father. This was groundbreaking. It was one of the first times in California that investigators caught a killer using a family member's DNA as the lead, and the family member in question was living under the same roof. July 7, 2010, police moved in and arrested Lonnie Franklin Jr. To confirm the match, an undercover officer even collected a slice of pizza Lonnie left behind at a party. The Grim Sleeper had been caught not by a witness or a confession, but by the DNA of his own child. And when investigators searched the family home, what they pulled out was staggering. Nearly 1,000 photographs of women and girls. Many of the images were deeply disturbing. Detectives said dozens of the women in those photos have still never been identified, and they believed Franklin's true victim count could be far higher than anyone proved in court. 2016, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was convicted of 10 murders. He was sentenced to death. For Sylvia, the horror was layered. Not only had she been married to a serial killer for decades without knowing it, but the thread that finally unraveled him ran through her own son. The family she'd built became the very thing that exposed the man at the center of it. 8 wives, 8 ordinary homes, and 8 women who learned the same devastating lesson: that sometimes the most dangerous stranger in the world isn't the one lurking outside your door. It's the one who's already inside wearing a wedding ring and calling you his wife.